everyone, here's Milan. And then in last video we mentioned that YuHuan did not died at that time. So and then we mentioned that she might run to Japan and then spend her rest of her life in Japan. So the reason why I'm saying that is definitely because there is evidence that support YuHuan did exist in Japan before. So first of all, YuHuan is very famous in Japan, and Japanese people generally know that there are two famous people in ancient China. One of them is the Confucius, and then another one is YuHuan. So Chinese people list YuHuan as one of the 4 great beauties in China, while Japan is even more impressive, listing YuHuan as one of the 3 great beauties of the world. And the other 2 world-class beauties are the Egyptian Empress Cleopatra and then the Japanese Heian era consorts Ono Komachi. Ono Komachi was not only a beauty that made the world fall in love with her, but also a famous poet in the Heian period, and YuHuan is almost the same era of beauty. YuHuan is a beauty that much favored by the Emperor Shenzong of the Tang Dynasty, and she had a legendary death. In 756 AD, An Lushan Rebellion, and the rebels attacked the Chang'an, and Emperor Shenzong of the Tang Dynasty abandoned the city with his family. All the generals and soldiers were tired and hungry, and there were a lot of complaints. So at this time, when people's hearts were extremely unstable, the crown prince Li Hain suddenly just killed the prime minister, and then that prime minister is called Yang Guizhong, and then the crown prince Li Hain and then demanded to kill YuHuan. In the face of this blackmail, the Emperor Shenzong realized that YuHuan was innocent. However, if he did not kill YuHuan, the army would split up and he would not only his country, but also lose his own life. The Emperor Shenzong had no choices but to kill YuHuan with his sword. In that year, YuHuan was 38 years old, and then her body was thrown into a well, so that the generals could witness the YuHuan was really dead in order to continue to fight with the opposite armies, and then to protect Emperor Shenzong to escape to the west. 50 years later, Baiji, who is a great poet of the Tang Dynasty, wrote a famous long poem called The Song of the Long Hay. The Song of the Long Hay recorded the history of the Mawei Slope, and then the Mawei Slope history can be found in my previous video. And because of this poem, the tragic love story between the Emperor Shenzong and YuHuan was being passed down. However, over the past 1,000 years, many people could doubt whether the Emperor Shenzong, as an emperor, would really kill his consort with his own hands. Obviously, there can be a big question mark here. There is a theory that YuHuan was not actually killed. It is said that Chen Xuanli, the commander of the army, loved YuHuan's beauty and could not bear to kill her, so he plotted with Gao Lishi, a key official of Emperor Shenzong, to replace her with a servant girl. As it turned out, the remains of YuHuan that Gao Lishi showed to the generals were in fact the body of that servant girl. Because of the person who examined the remains was no other than Chen Xuanli himself. Instead, YuHuan was escorted by Chen Xuanli's close friends to the south, and finally set sail from Guangdong City in Jiangsu province and then moved to Japan. It is also said that upon her arrival in Japan, YuHuan was received by the then Japanese empress, the Empress Huqian, who arranged for her to reside in Wakayama near Nara, and betrothed her to Fujiwara as his wife. When the capital of Japan was moved to Kyoto, she went with him to Kyoto and lived there for 30 years before she died in Kyoto in the age of 68. There's a tomb of Yang YuHuan in Yamaguchi Prefecture in Japan, and in 1963, a Japanese woman showed her family tree to the television audience, saying that one of her ancestors was Yang YuHuan. And also a few years later, a famous Japanese movie star, I'm not gonna mention who she is, but she said that her ancestors is also Yang YuHuan. According to the information courts, there has been a long history of claims about the Yang YuHuan's eastward journey to Japan. As early as the 1920s, Mr. Yu Pingbo had the famous Red Scholar pointed out in a questionable article on the Son of Law and Hate, and the biography of the Son of Law and Hate that Yang YuHuan might not have died at the Maui Slope, but went to Japan. After all, Bai Zhiyi wrote the Song of the Hate only 50 years before the Maui Slope incident. Because of the proximity of time and the fact that Bai Zhiyi was also a court official, he could have been able to get the real material. However, it was impossible for him to write out all the facts, so he could only write the following in the Song of the Law and Hate. This poet implies that Yang YuHuan fled to the immoral mountain on the sea. Then where is the immoral mountain written in the Song of Law and Hate? We note that there are 3 immoral mountains in the sea, including the Penglai, which is an island of immorality inhabited by gods and goddesses as conceptualized by Chinese Taoism. But in the Japanese literature, Mountain Penglai refers to Japan. Therefore, it can hardly be said that Bai Zhiyi, who was closely associated with the Japanese Tang Dynasty envoys, was a completely fabricator when he implied that Yang YuHuan had fled to Japan in the Song of Law and Hate. So how was the story of Yang YuHuan celebrated in Japan? The monk of the ancient Japanese temple that enshrines the tomb of Yang YuHuan once wrote, "In July of 15th year of Tianbao, Emperor Xuanzong beloved consort Yang YuHuan disembarked on an empty capital boat with the Kuwatsu Tang ferry. Soon after disembarking, she was spurred behind the temple. And Tianbao 50 years is the year of 756 AD. In 756 AD, Yang YuHuan and her attendants drifted to the place called Tengduko in Kuwatsu, the Yamaguchi, and is soon after landing Yang YuHuan died. And the locals spurred her on the high slope with a view of the sea to the west and a distance view of her homeland. Later, Yang YuHuan told the Emperor Xuanzong in a dream that she had arrived to Japan and was no longer alive, and that from then she would be separated from heaven and earth, and that she will only meet with the Emperor Xuanzong again in the next life." Grief-stricken Emperor Xuanzong sent Chen An, which is the general of the White Horse, to pay homage to Yang YuHuan. But Chen An did not find a grave, and so he went back after depositing in 2 statues of the Buddha and the 13-story pagoda he brought with him at the Seryoji Temple in Kyoto. When a small temple in Aburaya-cho heard about this, they asked the Seryoji Temple in Kyoto to preserve the 2 statues, and it said that it finally received the 2 imitation statues, but in any case, this small temple was named the Temple of 2 Statues because it ensured 2 statues. The same story is told in Japanese literature by Hiroshi Nengon's Yang YuHuan's Gaiden and Ryusaku Watabing's The Secret History of the Resurrection of Yang YuHuan, who hypothesizes that Yang YuHuan was not strangled at Maui Slope, but rather escaped on a boat to Yamaguchi in Japan. Not long ago, when a blogger went to the Yamaguchi prefecture to cover the arrival of Russian president, he specifically went on a quest to find the remains of Yang YuHuan. The tomb of Yang YuHuan is located in Aburaya Cho, not from the Anshan Hotel where President Putin met with the Prime Minister, a 30-minute drive away. Local elders told that blogger that Aburaya Cho is Prime Minister's ape's hometown, where his ancestors lived. In Aburaya town, there is a beautiful bay called Aburaya Bay, and on the high slope of Aburaya Bay, there is a temple called the Temple of Two Buddha Statues, where the tomb of Yang YuHuan is located. There's a white jade statue of Yang YuHuan in the temple. In 1993, the government of Yonggu town paid the Xi'an Academy of Fine Arts in China to sculpt a statue of the same size as the statue of Yang YuHuan at the Maowei slope, out of white jade. After the sculpture was completed in Xi'an, it was shipped all the way to Japan. But this statue of Yang YuHuan in Japan is a bit thinner than the one in the Maowei slope. It's probably because that Japanese people doesn't like fat beauties too much. But behind the statue is a 5-story stone tower, about 2 meters high, which is Yang YuHuan's tomb. The tower is surrounded by several smaller stone towers, which are said to be the graves of the maids of honor who followed Yang YuHuan to Japan. Not far from Yang YuHuan's tomb, there is a ferry port called Tang Ferry Port, which, as the name suggests, is where the Yang YuHuan disembarked in the Tang Dynasty. Near this ferry, there is a museum called the Tongjinbei Museum. The information on display shows that between 1953 and 1988, more than 300 human bones were excavated along the beach in Aburaya Cho. An expert had testified that these 300 or so bones are all ancient Chinese. And why does they say they are Chinese? Because all these people had a special posture when they were buried. All the heads were facing the sea in the direction of China. The locals said that these were immigrants from China. Hearing them saying that, I was shocked. Could it be that Prime Minister Abe's ancestors were also Chinese? The tomb of Yang YuHuan is already a provincial protected culture assessed in Japan, and it also assigned the function of guardian of women, helping the infertile women to have baby safety, and helping young people to find a husband and make a good relationship. There are also a lot of specialities related to Yang YuHuan, such as steamed buns named after her, which are stuffed with beans and are said to be as beautiful as Yang YuHuan. Locally grown rice has a nice name called Yang YuHuan Stream, which says that the seeds were brought by Yang YuHuan in the past. And it said that the seeds were brought by Yang YuHuan. At the site of Yang YuHuan's tomb, there is also a hotel. Since 2011, Niigata City has designated October 7 every year as Yang YuHuan Memorial Day, which is called Hongyang Matsuri Day, and a grand commemorative ceremony will be held at the Erzuni Temple. The beautiful love in the song of Lon Hate, wishing to be a bird with 2 wings in the sky, wishing to be a branch with 2 branches on the earth, is still long after thousands of years. So this is the end of this video. If you like this video and you love the story of Yang YuHuan, please follow my channel and like this video. Thank you very much. See you guys next time.